What factors spurred Western expansion? Well, one was manifest destiny, which was an American belief that most Americans believed to be the superiority of their institutions and white culture, which bestowed upon them a God given right to spread their civilization across the continent. In 1845, a New York political journal edited by a man named John O. Sullivan coined the term manifest destiny as the latest justification for American expansionism, billing it as the divine plan of God to give us the conquest of the West. Economic gain were important to the concept of manifest destiny. As we know, politicians wanted Western America, and average Americans did as well. And politicians wanted Pacific coast ports to encourage trade with Asia. Think Los Angeles and San Francisco. Oregon and the Overland Trail. We'll focus on that. The Oregon Country was claimed by both the United States and Great Britain in 1818, leaving the Oregon Country here open to settlement from both. Now, this agreement was very tenuous and certainly isn't what either side wanted. The reality is that Great Britain could not possibly control this area. The United States believed that if they just sent enough people in, which is exactly what started to happen by the late 1830s, as 350,000 migrants by 1869 started making it to this whole area of the Oregon Country. American politicians believed that Great Britain would simply have to cede this, at least part of the land. Living there were some 250,000 Plains Indians who lived peaceful lives, sedentary lives, but a majority were horse-mounted, nomadic, non-agricultural peoples whose warriors symbolized the savage Indian in the minds of whites, and so therefore justification for demonizing the Native Americans, who really did strike a lot of fear into westward movers, which is kind of interesting considering that most people, this is a true story, most people coming overland on the trail in this horrible, as you can read, 6 months and heat and drought and everything, more people died from self-inflicted gun wounds than they died from Native Americans, ambushing them or something. So it was a difficult trail to get there. There were Native Americans sort of in the way, and Native Americans, of course, were looked at as a hindrance rather than a help. You can only imagine how difficult it must have been for a family to try to get all the way west. It was very difficult. I think about the story of the Donner Party, who made it to the Sierra Nevada, and who actually got stuck in the snow over Donner Pass, which is kind of on the border between Nevada and California. And these folks had to resort to cannibalism to stay alive. I don't think going west was just in any way fun, or as we might think about it in our popular media. Here's a close-up of the Oregon Trail. There's two different trails. Well, there's, I guess, a few of them. You got the Oregon Trail. You've got the California Trail. This is what I was just talking about right here, called Donner Pass. And of course, you have the Southern Trail, which is the Santa Fe Trail, which splits off. And so all of these trails were used to try to get to the west. The Mormons. In 1830, Joseph Smith Jr., who's right here, who was only 24, published the Book of Mormon and founded the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay. Converts who were repulsed by America's social turmoil and rampant materialism flocked to the new church. However, neighbors did not like the Mormon church and branded them heretics, and they drove Smith and his followers from New York to Ohio, then to Missouri, and eventually all the way to Salt Lake City, Utah, under a new leader, Brigham Young. So by 1850, most of that land in Utah had been basically annexed by the United States as the Utah Territory. So you have people not necessarily of a religious sect or group moving west, and then you also have Mormons. In the Mexican borderlands, you had a clash of cultures. You had, in the Mexican Southwest, which was controlled, of course, by Mexico, present-day Arizona, California, New Mexico. You had westward moving Anglo-American pioneers confronting northern moving Spanish-speaking frontiersmen, creating a collision of cultures, interests, and aspirations. Mexico really had not many people populating those areas, and Americans, sensing that weakness, quickly moved into the region, particularly in Texas. And in Texas, there were many Americans, some slave owners, who brought cotton and slaves with them and established a thriving plantation economy. It must be said that the Mexicans at first wanted Anglos to come and populate their lands, as they did not simply not have the manpower to populate it themselves. However, by 1830, the Mexican government sensed that the folks in Texas were out for just more than actually settlement, and so they banned immigration in 1830. And the Texan settlers actually rebelled, and the Mexican leader Santa Anna ordered the Mexican army northward. At the Alamo and Goliad, Mexican forces defeated the Americans, but in April 1836, at San Jacinto, General Sam Houston's army crushed Santa Anna's troops. The Texans had succeeded in creating a Lone Star Republic. In the following year, the United States recognized the independence of Texas from Mexico. In California, you also had a similar situation developing, where wagon after wagon in the 1840s came south from the Oregon Trail to the California Trail, and this, of course, alarmed Mexican officials because they were worried about the same type of thing that happened here in Texas happening here. And to be honest, the same thing did happen in California as it did in Texas. And part of it was by design. The U.S. government wanted a guy named John C. Fremont to go and scope out California and see if it was even possible to control it. Yeah, kind of sinister stuff, but that's what our government did. And you can see what basically happened as more Anglos started to come in, and they revolted. The politics of expansion are pretty interesting. In Texas situation, Texans had sought admission into the Union in 1836, but any suggestion of adding another slave state to the Union outraged most of the Northerners. Moreover, annexing Texas risked starting a war because Mexico had never relinquished its claim to its lost province. So, when William Henry Harrison died in 1841, 1 month after taking office, President John Tyler attempted to annex Texas, but was not able to steer the treaty through the Senate. Again, Northern resistance. Texas was still an issue in the 1844 election when Henry Clay came out against the annexation, and James Polk, the Democratic nominee who was strongly in favor, terming the issue reannexation. Polk won the election, therefore the movement to obtain Texas and annex it was became center stage in the mid-1840s. In February of 1845, Congress approved a joint resolution offering the Republic of Texas admission to the United States. Texas then entered as the 15th slave state. As part of his campaign, James K. Polk had also promised to deliver Oregon to the United States. Westerners demanded that the new president make good on the pledge called 54-40 or fight, that is, all of Oregon right up to Alaska. He renewed an old offer to the British to divide Oregon along the 49th parallel, and of course, Britain accepted the compromise, which is exactly where the border is between Canada and the United States, up in the Pacific Northwest. This is all leading up to the war against Mexico, called the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. Now, James K. Polk was no slouch when it came to telling everyone what he really wanted to do. He wanted this land, and they were willing to go and get it no matter how. The start of the war was not started by the Mexicans per se. Polk had already ordered General Zachary Taylor to march to the banks of the Rio Grande, which is right here. The Mexicans saw the American advance as aggression, and on April 25th, 1846, the Mexican cavalry attacked a party of American soldiers. In a way, the Americans basically goaded the Mexicans into a fight. As the United States troops came to the very edge, the Mexicans, of course, see this as a threat, and they attack first. This is an interesting thing that's going on in America. You have a very divisive issue in this war. The war divided the nation. Northern Whigs condemned the war, saying basically it was a war for slavery and to expand it. Whereas Democrats, who were expansionists at the time, believed that this was a war to extend the power of the United States. The strategy was a short war in which U.S. armies would occupy these northern provinces here and defeat the Mexican army in a decisive battle or two, after which Mexico would sue for peace and the United States would keep the territory and its armies occupied. At first this worked, but the Mexicans were going to refuse to allow to trade land for peace. Eventually, the United States was able to defeat Mexico with a risky plan when General Taylor and Winfield Scott, especially Winfield Scott's plan of landing an army on the Gulf Coast here and then marching all the way into Mexico City, and basically forcing the Mexicans to give up all of this territory. It was a risky plan. It worked, though. On February the 2nd, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, in which Mexico agrees to give up all the lands to the north. As you can see, here's the treaty line right here, and this is exactly what we were able to do. In a way, the United States was a bully, goading Mexico into firing the first shot and engaging in a 2-year war in which the United States size essentially filled out the rest of the continent. Enormous consequences. The United States had achieved its self-proclaimed manifest destiny to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and now it would enter the industrial age with vast new resources and a 2-ocean economy, while Mexico forevermore will face a sharpened, problematic future as they struggle and continue to struggle to achieve economic independence and power apart from the United States.